All right, now the last piece of this puzzle is our subject. We've done our observers, we've done our observer lists. Now let's create our subject so we can make this whole thing work. Now, what we want to do is make our task a subject. But if you've been watching this course long enough, you kind of know my feelings on messing with things that already work. So I don't want to make task a subject by adding observer list and notify to task because task already works. I don't want to mess with it. So what we're going to do is we're going to wrap task with a subject and make it an observable task. So let's take a minute and let's build out an observable task with an observer list and this notify function. Now, the way we're going to do that, if you remember from our conversation on the decorator pattern, is we're going to create a new thing called an observable task. So let's minimize this stuff, fold it up, and get it out of our way. Now, we're going to do an observable task. So the var observable task equals a function, working the same way the task does. So it takes data and then call out to task. So task.call. And remember what call does is it allows me to pass this into it and then whatever parameters. So I am just passing the this context of observable task off to task. So now observable task has everything that task adds to this gets added to observable task. And then I also want to do something with the observers. So I'm going to add to my observable task this observers list. So this dot observers equals new observer list. And basically I'm just newing up an empty array. If you look at observer list, it's just an empty array, this dot observer list. That's all it is. So now that I've got an observable task, I'm going to add a couple of methods to its prototype so that we can start dealing with observers. And the first one is going to be to add an observer. So in this case, we've added an add observer function, and we're going to pass in to that function observer and then just add whatever's passed in to our observer list. And this is what's going to be executed when we do notify. So notification service is going to pass in, if we go back up to notification service, what it's going to pass in is this dot update. It's going to pass in update, and then that's what's going to be executed when we do notify. All right, so I've got observable task and I've got add observer. Now we want to add notify. And notify is going to be a little bit more complicated. So we've got a function called notify and we're passing in a context. So whatever the context is that we want to do. In our case, we're going to pass in task because when task calls notify, it's just going to pass itself in as the context so that when my alert gets called, update, notice I'm asking for a task. I'm going to do task.user. So my context in this case is always going to be task. Now I'm going to loop over that array. The first thing I'm going to need when I loop over the array is how long my array is. And we didn't implement a count yet. So let's implement a count. So observer list.count just to get the length of how long our observer list is. So we've added to prototype a count, which is just going to return observer list.length. And I don't have to hide all this stuff. I could just access that array directly, but I'd rather go through the motions of adding helper methods so that we're protecting our array a little bit. All right, so now I've got a count. So now back down here, I've got my observer count, and now I'm just going to loop. So I'm just going to do a simple little for loop that's going to iterate over my observers. And then for every observer, I'm going to go and get whatever they've passed in, and then I'm going to execute it with my context. So basically what that means is I have allowed objects to add themselves to me. So add observer, I'm adding observers, and then when I hit notify, I'm just looping over that array of observers and calling whatever's been passed to me. I'm not checking to make sure it's a function. I probably should do that, but add that in if you would like to. All right, now I have to call notify, and I have to figure out what I want to notify on. So if we go back and we look at task, it's got two methods. It's got complete and save. So let's say when save is executed, so whenever you save something, I want my, scrolling back to the top, I want my notification service, my logging service, and my auditing service all to know about it. So I am going to overwrite my save method on task. So observable task, my method name is going to be save. and that doesn't take any arguments. So if you remember how to do an overwritten method, the last thing we're going to do is actually call task.prototype.save, and we're going to do a .call so we can pass in our this context. And since we don't have any arguments, we're not passing in any arguments. Now, before I save, or maybe after I save, you could do it either place, I want to notify. So I'm going to do a this.notify. And I am, for my context, remember, I'm going to send my task. So I'm just going to send in this. So that way, whatever method is getting called with my this context, not as their own this context, but just so it has access to my this. And in this case, what we're doing up here is task. So now that I'm doing a this.notify, everything that adds itself to my observable task is going to be notified. The last piece of this is to change task 1 into an observable task. There you go. Now, nothing really should change. Everything should still work with my task. So now task 1's an observable task. It's got notify on it. All that stuff's done. Now we just have to register our services on our task. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to do task1 dot add observer and pass in whatever we want observed. So in this case, it's notification.update. Not an executed notification.update, just pass in the function itself. We'll copy that and add 2 more because we want to do our logging service and our audit service. So now when I save, I should get a notification, a logging, and an audit all working for me. So if we look at this and we run it, if I do node main.js, what we'll see is our 3 notifications. We'll see notifying user for task. We'll see logging user for task, and we'll see auditing user task. So let's run this and see if that works. So there we go. Notifying, logging, auditing, and then the task. So this is the observer pattern. This is how that works. Task 1 keeps a record of all the observers and then notifies everybody that they're there. There's one more piece of this I want to do though. Let's add an option to remove observers so that an observer can opt out of receiving notifications.